Hey everybody. I just actually wanted to talk a little bit about my Chinese algae eater right here, making a very dramatic appearance in this video. I've been trying to get him on video for a while now, and every time I move he darts and dashes away, so get a good look while you can in case he vanishes, because I am going to keep talking about him for a few minutes here. He's in a 55-gallon tank, and he's pretty big. He's pretty boisterous, and he takes up a lot of space in the tank. He thrashes around, he moves about, he occupies certain territories. He doesn't like other fish getting near them. He does a fantastic job of keeping the tank clean. I'm not going to argue with that at all. But the reason I want to talk about him, and the reason I'm bringing him up in his size in particular, I see people regularly. I was in the big chain pet store the other day, and I heard somebody inquiring about one of these, and it was actually recommended for them to get for their 10-gallon tank as a good way to keep their tank clean. These fish get nearly a foot long. They don't get all of that all at once, but they do grow very fast in their first year. Fish are what are called indeterminate growth animals. They never really stop growing, but their growth slows down dramatically the older they get. So as they're reaching sexual maturity, they grow very quickly. So you will get, and again it depends on the age of the animal, if it's an animal that lives 40 years, its initial growth period will be longer, and it'll also be less dramatic. If it's a fish that has a 3 to 5 year lifespan, your initial growth period is really going to be in that first 9 months maybe, or the first year. You're going to see a ton of growth, and then it'll slow down, and the older the fish gets, the slower it'll get, and eventually it'll get to where it doesn't really appear to be growing at all anymore. It just sort of tops out, and then that'll be the end of it, and eventually the fish will just sort of die of old age. But they do usually continue growing pretty much their entire life. I know this holds true for other animals. I believe it holds true for fish. I'm not 100% positive on that. But the point being, whether they stop growing at some point or not, you're going to get a lot of growth in that first year. So I know it takes a little while for them to get up to their 10 or 11 inches, which they top out at. But if you put one of those in your 10-gallon tank, it's not going to be there for very long at all. The one we just saw probably got to about 80% of the size he is now within the first 9 months I had him. There you go, there's another look at him. And he's probably about 7 inches long now. He's a meaty fish. That's a sizable fish. And you can see how aggressively he was snapping at the angelfish. That was more just to get the angelfish out of the way. I have had people ask me why the algae eater does not attach to the sides of my angelfish. When they do that, that's not aggression you're seeing. That's actual hunger. They are algae eaters, but they're not algae eaters in the sense that that's all they eat. Usually when a fish is called an algae eater, it's not. It's actually an off-flux grazer. Algae eating fish are things like guppies and platies and mollies. Those are algae eaters. The kind of fish that have sucker mouths, plecos, or the Chinese algae eaters, Siamese algae eaters, these fish actually need to live on what is called off-flux. It means surface growth or biofilm, and it's the stuff that they clean off of your tank for you. That is just full of little microcrustaceans and worms, and there's all sorts of protein and little meaty stuff in there, is my point. It's not just algae. They're not grass eaters. They need a lot of a lot of meat with their vegetation. So if you actually have one of these and you're letting it just live on the algae in the tank, and maybe throwing some occasional algae wafers, or if you're throwing some sliced vegetables in there, something for it to eat, that's all well and good, but it needs some meat in its diet. And the older it gets, the more meat it will need. And as long as its meat needs are met, it won't go after your flat-bodied fish. When it does that, it's actually eating the slime coat off the animal. And it's doing it because it's protein starved. So I actually did notice that behavior early on. By the time it was about 3 or 4 inches long, which was just a couple months after I got it, I noticed that it was attaching to my angelfish. It wouldn't leave him alone. And so I decided I would try putting some shrimp pellets in the tank, and within hours he was not bothering the angelfish at all anymore. And so I waited and I watched, and I tried this several times, and I found that the moment I saw him starting to go after the angelfish, if I put some shrimp pellets in the tank, he stopped and left them alone. So from then on, maybe 2 years ago, I just always make sure I've got enough meaty food going into this tank that that algae eater never gets hungry like that. And I simply never have issues with him attaching to the angelfish at all. He will snap at them. He will go after them. If they get down on the bottom near his cave, he definitely will shoo them away. But he doesn't bother them. He's not an aggressive fish in those terms. When you see that kind of behavior, it's because they're starved. They need food that is a meatier type food. Again, I just throw some shrimp pellets in there, but any kind of sinking carnivore, you want it to go to the bottom. They're going to need to get it off the bottom. But any kind of shrimp pellet or sinking carnivore pellet or anything like that should be good, as long as it's something that's got the meaty proteins in it for them. And if you do that, you shouldn't have any issues with your flat-bodied fish in the tank that it might be trying to attach to. That's all that's really about. My big warning with these, however, is the size. People really underestimate how fast these grow and how big they get. If I had to go back and do it again, knowing what I know now, I probably would not get him. I debate all the time on getting him out of this tank just because he's so boisterous, and he's really disruptive in the tank. The cave he's in is that's the prime real estate in the tank, as you can probably tell, and that used to be the home of my Pimelodus pictus, who is now hiding back there in that cave. So that is not prime real estate. You see his face is all out in the bright light and it's all wide open. He does not like that at all, but he got sick of fighting with this algae eater over this cave for about 2 years, and he finally just gave up now that this algae eater is so big. Did you see him blink right there? He's so big and aggressive with defending his territory that my pictus just gave up, and he hangs out down at the other end of the tank now. So he was evicted from his home of 3 years by this algae eater right here, and now he lives in the other wrong end of the tank. So, again, they're not fish for 10-gallon tanks. They're not fish for 20-gallon tanks. And eventually, he's probably even going to outgrow this 55. If he actually gets up to be 10 or 11 inches like he's supposed to, that's a lot of fish. But it will probably take quite a long time before he really gets that big. Right now, like I said, he's maybe 6.5 to 7. But he's a beefy fish. So that's my 2 cents. Just was thinking about that while I was sitting here watching him. He was out because I just threw some shrimp pellets in, and I also threw some sinking algae wafers in there, which he also really likes. You can see how clean the tank is. I barely ever have to wipe the glass down or anything. He just, again, no complaints with him keeping the tank clean. You want a fish that's going to scour your tank, that's the fish to do it. But keep all that other stuff in mind. They cannot live solely... my little Crenicichla over there attacking my shark. They go at each other all the time. The shark chases him, he chases the shark. I never really worried about that. Both of those fish are sort of equipped to be in sort of aggressive situations. So I don't really have any issues between the shark and the Crenicichla there. The worst fish in the tank, though, is this algae eater, believe it or not. I know it doesn't seem like it would be the worst fish to have, but he really is. So again, there's my 2 cents. Thanks for watching. If you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and do so. That way you won't miss anything. You never know what you may get when you watch one of my videos. Could be just about anything. So thanks for watching this one, and I will see you real soon on the next one.